Yeah. Shall I go ahead? Yeah. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Happy New Year to you all, first and foremost. Today, we are going to be looking at two more case studies on integrated business solutions paper. So, we will have some break in between because it's a long session. So, let's first start with the first case study on a, a huge family settlement example, right? So this is what we are going to be taking up. We are going to see what are the ramifications and how it works and various things which comes up in the process of doing it. So this is basically the story of unbundling a legacy, strategic lessons which we can learn from the Mahindra family split. This is a synonym. There is no real life case which has been portrayed here, but of course it's been taken based on certain other entities which have happened in India. Um, as you know, many of the business houses have been there for long and maybe after multiple generations. So, as the generations grow, there is more and more family members who come into it. Globally, there have been different models in which they have moved forward. And the Indian scenario is, in a way, they give a lot of importance to businesses being taken rather than just only shareholding over the period. So, in that context, this becomes very important to see how it all went about. So, let's look at this group, Mahindra Group. It was a 1800 founded group. So it was a very old group, right? It's been there for more than 100 years now. And it's one of the respected conglomerates in multiple industries. They had businesses in FMCG, they had business in real estate, they were into appliances, they were into engineering and chemicals. So multiple businesses which are housed there. So typically, what happens with all these large business houses is that they start with something that over a period, for various reasons, they start newer businesses. Maybe somebody was interested, maybe one of the children was an engineer, so he started something. Maybe somebody was into architecture, so he started something. Like this, it happens. But over a period, they build a huge portfolio of multiple things, or maybe they see some opportunities in newer areas or as a diversification. So, like this, it builds into a large thing. So, in this case, this conglomerate had interest in enormous number of lines of business, and they were, as a family, seen to be a united group. They were value driven for governance, and in the 2020s, they entered into a huge transformation. That is nearly after 120 years, they are looking at a huge transformation. So in April 2020, the family announced a consensual split. Most important is this: there is no dispute, there is no fight. They have all agreed that they need to split the businesses, and they just split it into two branches. One family branch, right, which went with Anand and Nikhil Mahindra. The other family branch went with Raghav and Sunita Mahindra. This whole case study we are going to talk about covers the restructuring which was done through this business realignment, what happened to the brand rights, and also the company had huge land bank worth nearly 1.75 lakh crores. It's not ordinary sums, huge sums, right? So typically what happens is many of these companies, when they started, they had land in what at that time was considered as Mofussil area or just outside the city limits, where they had their factories, etc. Now, as we all know, over the years, cities have grown. Cities have grown boundlessly, and this has made many of these industrial lands into prime areas today. I think many of you in Bombay will know about the a case of Kandivali, where a large chunk of the Kandivali land was actually used for milk cows. There used to be hectares of area under which cows were being held, and there was being for milk was being supplied from there to the Bombay city of those days. That has translated into what is known as Thakur complex today. There are probably a few 100,000 people living there today. It's become so large. It's a huge transformation, and that's a land which originally was probably worth a pittance. Today it is worth millions and millions. So that is what happens over a period in some of these things. So in the Mahindra group also, there was significant amount of land which had huge values. So unlike in case of some contentious splits where the family disputes, the family starts fighting, and then there is mediation, and then something which is done, etc. This was a consensual split, and it was significantly professionally managed financial arrangement between the family, so that they are able to preserve the legacy, right? At the same time, give strategic independence to the different parts of the family in today's context. So what happens over 120 years? There are at least 3 or 4 generations which have changed. Now, just because of the multiple levels of generation going, the number of people in the family are significantly large who have a stake in the entities. The second is many of them have diversified views on what they want to do and what they are looking at, etc. from the business. So everybody wants some amount of freedom. Another example you can see is from the south, the TVS group, which literally after the 5th generation, 4th and 5th generation are in helm of affairs now. And they split into nearly 10 separate entities. Again, a very, very consensual arrangement, very professionally managed family arrangement they made between themselves and got to that. So here also is a case where such a scenario had happened. So this case study explores the strategic, legal, and financial, as well as governance dimensions of the split, highlighting how legacy businesses in India, families, they navigate the complexity of the whole transition. There are humongous complexities which are there in such a thing, which needs to be looked at. So just to give a background and history to it, the Mahindra group started with Raman Mahindra and Devraj Mahindra, the 2 brothers who started this. Then below that came Naresh Mahindra, Suresh Mahindra, Mohan and Prakash, their children. And below their children then came a huge amount of further children who have come up into the business. Some of them, the family did not expand much, or they did not come into it, they moved out, but some of them were all here. So as you can see, as it goes down to the 4th generation, there are about 10 of them in the 4th generation children who had say now, whereas against the original 2 promoters who were there from the family. So look at the way the things have moved. And not only that, the group had a bundle of listed as well as unlisted entities. And some of the unlisted entities, listed entities were fairly important, right? The 5 listed entities had a huge market cap of about 2.5 lakh crores. So it's not small companies, but significant amount of listed entities were there. And as you can see from the list, there was also one very, very large company called Mahindra and Brooks, which was unlisted, but it had a huge, huge income happening. So this is the kind of companies which were being looked at to manage the family partition and settlement in a very smooth manner. So it's a huge and humongous exercise which had to be taken up. And let's move forward to see what more is coming on this. As I was mentioning, the group was from the 1800s, it was started by two brothers, right? So initially started by one, and then the second brother also came in and he expanded it. The company had deep roots into nationalism and self-reliance. So over a period, the company started manufacturing various things which were significant in the Indian context, Indian market, right? To grow into a huge empire with about 1.75 lakh crore business spanning multiple things. They were into consumer goods, they were into real estate, they were into industrial engineering. They also had some agro products. So many things which they had gotten over the period. The ownership and management had always remained with the Mahindra Group and the family, right? Which was, like I said before, it is in the fourth generation, with about 10 family members in the fourth generation, right? So that's a significant change which has happened over the period. The family's business holdings were largely divided into two big groups, Mahindra Industries Group and Mahindra and Brooks Manufacturing Company. So there were two major groups into which the whole family businesses were divided. Many of them were below that or in some way related to these two groups. The MIG group was led by Anand Mahindra and his family, right? Which also had listed entities such as the Mahindra Consumer Products, Mahindra Properties, Mahindra Agro, etc. While the Mahindra and Brooks group was managed by Raghav Mahindra, another cousin family, right? This largely controlled the unlisted industrial and legacy businesses. Now you can see clearly the divide also that somebody had early on itself taken to listing. For example, you can see here, Raghav Mahindra is on one end of the third generation, right? And Anand Mahindra comes into another end of the third generation with their own children, etc., who have and cousins who have interests, etc. So, as you can see, even in those days, slowly it had veered around two senior members who taking responsibility for two parts of the group, right? That's how it had gone on. And one had early on itself looked at going public, etc. So as you can see, one group had a lot of listed companies, etc., while the other group had mostly unlisted entities, though fairly large. So this is the way it had developed over the period. Another important thing is the family's wealth in the vast land bank of nearly 3,000 crores in Hyderabad, right? So they had a huge land bank of 3,000 acres in Hyderabad. This was largely under the Mahindra and Brooks entities. As you saw, the Mahindra and Brooks entities were mostly into the manufacturing, right? And early on, these were started manufacturing entities. So, and all these manufacturing entities were in the suburbs of the Hyderabad, Secunderabad of good old days. Over the period, the city has grown and these places have become part of the city. And they had huge tracts of land. So obviously the factories have moved, but the land is available for exploitation. The land has huge values. Though all of them belong to the Mahindra family, and there were very strong familial ties, they are all very close to each other. That's why you see this whole transition also has been happening with no contentious disputes, right? They were having shared legacy, etc. But there were differences in the business vision, governance style, etc. So, as you can see, even the listing, one set of companies had not gone anywhere near listing, the others were all largely listed, right? So, you can see the kind of differences which were there in the way people looked at the business and how they should be handling the business and governance. So it was felt very, very appropriate for the family to consider a structured separation to avoid future frictions and also ensure smooth transition within their own families and downward forward. Now, this is very, very important to understand because what is required is to look forward to see that it does not become a problem to then try and solve it, but to solve it upfront. So, looking at the business model and group, Mahindra Group functions through a dual structure, as we were talking about. The MIG Group or the Mahindra's Industries Group, which was led by Anand Mahindra, nothing to do with Mahindra and Mahindra. The listed entities with investor focus was all here. There was a company on FMCG, home care, personal care, which has global presence, etc. So they were even going abroad. Then there was a properties company which was into leading real estate businesses. Then there was a agro which was into animal feed, dairy, agri solutions, etc. So they were largely public listed. They were agile. They were innovation driven businesses. So newer businesses which have come, even realty and all, as you know, real estate took up a big thing only in the last few decades, and that is when these people have come into all this, right? So this is one. The other model, as you can see, which was led by Raghav Mahindra, the Mahindra and Brooks Group, were largely privately held manufacturing conglomerate. They were manufacturing many things. There were 12 plus unlisted firms. They were into aerospace components, they were into electricals, they were into furniture, they were into appliances, so many things, but all manufacturing, old school, privately held. And because of the history of manufacture, etc., over the period, they were controlling 3,000 acres of land in Hyderabad. Now, what we need to understand is both MIG and M&B, not Mills and Bone, but Mahindra and Brooks, both are owned by the same family in totality, and it is not a separate family held businesses. All these were family held amongst all the family members in the group, though they were managed and led by two scions of the third generation, Anand Mahindra and Raghav Mahindra, on different lines, probably to some extent. They were all ownership rights were with the same set of people. So this is the background to this thing, and they were largely legacy first, industrial engineering led. That is old school of this thing, manufacturing. So in fact, this key difference of how the MIG group looked at it from a listing perspective, investor-centric growth model, etc., and MNB's legacy-driven private model, this was one of the major contributors to nudge them towards the family business realignment, primarily because they knew that if they don't do all this, there is going to be a point when the smooth relations will be spoilt because of this, and maybe in one generation later there will be a bitter fight come. So they were very clear that it is good to do things in the right approach rather than get into a difficult scenario. So the family settlement was looking at separating, right, into two groups, Anand Group entities and Raghav Group entities, right? Or what is known as Mahindra Industries Group and Mahindra Enterprises Group, MIG and MEG. right? So this is how they were looking at. And the FSA here is family settlement arrangement. So it's a settlement arrangement between the family members of the Mahindra family to see how they can divide these companies between themselves in a manner which is reasonable and appropriate to all concerned at this point of time. The future, of course, depends on how they build this, etc., etc. So it could vary. But at the time of the split and transfer, obviously it has to be fair to everyone. And that is what was being looked at in this particular manner, right? So taking it forward from there, how the strategic decision making was coming in, right? It was not conflict driven, it was rooted in pragmatic goals. So they said our decision making now should be based on these guiding factors. That's why it was a well managed, professionally done family settlement. Obviously, there would have been a lot of consultants, there would have been advisors who would have given, and also smoothened the whole thing by giving them the right advice in the right direction. So the idea is to unlock growth, reduce operational overlap. One of the biggest challenges people find is operational overlap because my business, I want to run it my way, not your way. So how do you split it to ensure that this is made possible? And if I don't have that, I can't have that where there is a significant cross holding, then obviously the other person's priorities are also important. Other person's perception about the operational decisions are also important because he has a different viewpoint, which is what we saw in the previous. One group was clearly investor centric and innovation driven, growth oriented. The other one was clearly more engineering and legacy driven, manufacturing oriented and private. They don't want to shell out anything to the public, right? So there is a clear distinction in the way it is there. So there is a need to reduce operational overlap, which was there earlier. Even though they were separate entities, obviously board will contain people from both sides. There will be different viewpoints, etc., which comes. It is also to align with generational priorities. Now, it is very important to look at this. You see the way it has come now. There were two brothers in the 1800s or early 1900s, to 10 cousins who are all in the fourth generation who are going to be driving different businesses. It's very, very important to understand that they may have a completely different viewpoint of various things. We talk about Gen Z, Gen Y, millennial, and all. It applies to entrepreneurs also. It applies to everybody. Now, very interesting, just as an aside, you can see how, the Tata's Trent and all was not very, very active and aggressive at one point. But now you see they have brought out the Zudio. This was one of the younger generation's idea. I don't know how young he is. He's also a little older only. But comparatively, the next generation who was looking at it, and he has come out with this Zudio, which has really put them on a different scale right now. What happens in future, one doesn't know. But you see the kind of difference which is coming. And the type of clothing they are trying to bring out and to the market, etc. is also apparel's market changed the way it is looked at. At one point of time, we all know that Vimal was a big, big brand, but change is something which constantly happens. So you need to necessarily align with the generational priorities in everything, including the way how they think of driving the business and running it. And what has happened? 120 years of running, 120 years of slowly building block by block various companies. So all these have too many interholdings. There is too many interlocking, all that. Phenomenal structural complexity arises over a period, right? On one side, you have the MIG, which is publicly listed, agile, it's consumer facing, investor centric, etc. On the other side, you have M&B's businesses, which are legacy focused, engineering led, and land heavy. They were dependent on physical. The other one was more on intellectual or brand, etc. So, significant difference in the way they were doing. Divergence in strategy and governance also. You can see the brand usage and investment focus increasingly is misaligned between the two. Largely two groups, but it could be, when you go into details, you will find many levels of differences between individual companies. Limited synergy in operations and capital deployment. Over a period, what has happened? All these have become separate piece and parcel. There is limited synergy in operations and capital deployment. It becomes by itself another issue that there are so many limitations which arise on capital deployment, right? The fourth generation has come in. Right now, as we saw, the third generation were at the helm of the two large business groups within the family. But under that, in various businesses, the fourth generation are slowly coming in. Like Piyush Mahindra was driving the real estate business, and he was trying to take it into a significantly different direction. There is the Neha Mahindra. She was trying to lead of M&B business into its own directions, etc. Their visions, their outlook were all different from each other, and it could be significant. So, what is it that with all these differences, what were they looking at? They were looking at an outcome for a dignified, expert led split, which allows both branches to pursue independent strategies, ensure intergenerational continuity, at the same time preserve family harmony. Nobody wants to do all this with a bad blood. So, to avoid that and still achieve this, which they've been able to do, right? That is the important thing. Many families have been able to do it. As many families as we know where there has been a bitter fight for split of businesses, there have been many families where there have been a very smooth transition to ensure that the family harmony is maintained while the businesses are split and they move forward in each side as they grow, especially in generations. Now, common areas where there could be conflicts and challenges. The first one was with regard to brand usage. Mahindra brand was used across all the entities, right? Both listed, unlisted entities. Everybody was using Mahindra. Now, we all know that all that name Mahindra came from the family. And in 1899, nobody thought of how a brand should be, structured and things like that. Or even in the 1900s, nobody thought of making that as a very important thing, right? So there was absolutely lack of clarity on brand ownership and how it will be applied in future. So one of the key things they had to address was how the brand usage is going to be addressed. And there was also risk of overlap, confusion across diverse sectors for the same name being used. So this was one of the key challenges which was being looked at in the process of getting this settlement done, right? And the second was the huge land bank which we were talking about. As I was mentioning, there was a huge land bank which came about primarily because of lands in Madhapur. See, historically, what happens is each large business house started to buy land generally outside the city. So if you really go back into the 1900s, 1950s and all that, when they would have been growing significantly, transport, etc., was a big problem. So you can't keep the factories far away from the city. So you just kept it just outside the city, which was anyway in those days very, very cheap land compared to what's the scenario today. So they used to buy multiple land parcels together to see that many companies are housed there next to each other. So you will find very interestingly, many companies of the same group are housed next to each other in that land, etc. So like that, these people had acquired quite a lot of land. And over a period, what has happened is because the city was growing and expanding, the factories, when they had to expand and all that, have been moved elsewhere. It made more sense to move the factories out of the city, so they have moved elsewhere for various reasons. It could be for pollution reasons, it could be for licensing, it could be for potential to unlock the land later, etc. All that. So the group is sitting with 3,000 acres of prime land, largely in Madhapur, and this land bank was largely under the M&B group. This was another key thing, right? And this land consisted of inherited land, there were some trust held land, and there were some developed land also. So various kinds of things were there in that. Now, how to value it, how to divide it, how to monetize it was a major issue to be considered. Now, if you just apply a market value and leave it with one group, then that group is sitting with land which is not monetizable easily, whereas somebody else might be running business and that could be an easily monetizable item. So, how to consider these was another major challenge which they had to face, the land bank, how to deal with it, right? These are the things which comes up. Then the third area is various governance alignment. So MNB was privately governed, right? Whereas MIG is all set of public companies. The major chunk in MIG was all listed companies, right? Which had its own SEBI requirements, investor protection, all that to be taken into consideration. Now, when you have such a diverse scenario happening, it's very, very difficult to have a unified decision-making style across these entities. This was another major area of which had to be considered, right, and addressed. So all this led to a structured consensual split, right? Why was it done? It was to safeguard legacy. Nobody wanted to lose the Mahindra legacy. Everybody was, proud to be a Mahindra family member. There was no doubt about it. At the same time, they did not want it to affect other things. So, while the legacy was safeguarded, there is better ownership clarity as to which group owns what and who is going to have rights over what, etc., especially considering the divergent views on what should be the approach for business building, business growth, etc. And at the same time, maintain the enterprise value so that overall, in the process of this, the families do not end up in a scenario of lose and lose. It should be a win-win for everyone. So this was the thing which was being worked towards. So from a governance perspective and how the family manages governance, there was a legacy governance model of informal trust-based model which worked well for decades. Because, Indian style, that we are all used to the hierarchical this thing, and generally the elders are listened to and their point of views are always given patient hearing. The final word rests with the, with the head of the family, etc. The senior family members were taking on roles based on capability and also shared vision. So that is how they navigated towards the two groups, right? Some who were thinking more investor oriented were gyrating towards one group versus the other. And they were also bringing in their capabilities to the table. Some was good in marketing, some was good in business development, some was good in protection or engineering, innovation, agriculture. Like that, they brought in things to the table. It was flowing towards a consensus-driven approach to growth or decision making as they were as a single family, but obviously it lacked a formal structure. Just to take an aside, the Murugappa family has a very formal structured governance decision within the family. They have what is known as a family committee or board or whatever, where they sit and formally decide how the family is going to act on everything in the interest of the family as a whole. So it was a more formal structure. Of course, outside the board and this thing, it's only to the shareholders' interest. So like that, it has to evolve. But here it was not so formal, it was happening. So because there is no structured document which says this is how it should be done and this is what should be done, etc., the family constitution or formal dispute resolution system was also not there. There were also strategic bottlenecks in land monetization, the focus on different businesses, and what is the brand right to different parties. As the generations were increasing, the generational gaps were also becoming important in these decision making, where there could be differences because of the generational gap also. So this is what was happening over a period. Now, interestingly, again, just from what I have heard and learned, the TVS family in the south, which has also split into multiple parts now, when its original founder formed and he had his children brought in as members into this thing, there was clearly a codified mechanism which was there. It was a private company at the holding company, so there was a codified mechanism. Yeah, there were 4 sons for the original founder, so there are exactly 25% each in the family. As they go down, the 25% split between their own family members and down, like that it was going. That was one. The second is they had very clear agenda that money received, any investments they make in various businesses, there must be a return. There must be a policy of dividend declaration, and that dividend will come to the holding company, and the holding company will also similarly declare dividends. So, which meant money was going back to the investors. Third, they have also said that whenever new investment opportunities come, the family which is bringing in that business model can ask for money from the holding company, which may or may not be given. If it is not given, they can bring in from their own sources. So, whereby over a period, different families could take some businesses with more risk on their own. It cannot risk the whole family's money in their visions unless the whole family agrees. This is how the structure was developed initially. So there are also things like that which people thought about and did long back in some cases, but in some cases it had to evolve because nobody plans this kind of a thing early was not heard of in the earlier centuries. Now, of course, things are becoming more driven towards that. And again, there are different ways it is dealt with in the Indian context and the international context and all that. So somewhere I will also talk about some of those examples. So they brought in advisors. So this whole thing, for it to be done, there were need for advisors from a multiple angle. First, you needed a lot of legal advice. You needed financial advice. You also wanted them to give you governance dimension and direction. They had to ensure that whatever is being done is done in a fair and transparent manner for everybody's benefit in the process of doing, adhering to the legal and financial requirements, etc. So this facilitated a very structured dialogue, fairness in asset valuation, and a smooth separation. Otherwise, things like this 3,000 acre of land, which has a huge valuation, and how it should be split, and how it can be monetized, or how you will compare with a running business which is valued at X versus a land valued at X. Will you compare that equally, or will you give them differentiation? All this will have to be addressed. So without all this, that smooth separation may not have easily happened. So that is one of the requirements to ensure that this is necessary. The key learnings which came from all this is, yes, family council could be there, family council could discuss, etc. But it does not have the authority required to actually effect it in a company or something, right? In a company, ultimately, it is only the shareholders or directors who can act on their own. So unless all of them are always going to just go by the family council's decision, it need not reflect in the manner it is put across in the companies ultimately. The settlement also reinforced the need for formal governance going forward to ensure future transparency, harmony, and strategic clarity. So that is also something which came from all this, saying, okay, how do we bring all that into some process? Is also something which came from all this. So from a valuation perspective, this again posed challenges in a different way, because there were a mix of listed companies, unlisted companies, right? So you have to value the listed company, you have to value the unlisted company. There were brands which are being shared. So how do you value the brand that is being used by multiple people within the set of these companies, and also the large land holdings which are there, right? And in the land holdings, as we saw earlier, the Mahindra and Brooks Madhapur land chunk was the biggest component, significant component. So the value is assessed from both current market value perception and monetization potential. All that was considered in deciding what is to be done with these. The shareholding restructuring had to be done. So share swaps were to be executed, right? To ensure that the families which wanted to go with one group versus the other, the shares are exchanged so that the shareholding also gets separated. Exit was to be available from non-core entities, right? To avoid cross holdings, etc. The whole thing had to be done in compliance with SEBI requirements, because there are some listed companies. It had to be compliant with tax laws, because many of these would trigger taxation, etc. It has to be compliant with company law. There could also be stamp duty, which varies state to state. All these will have also got to be considered in doing the settlement. So this is how it was looked at. From a legal perspective, because this was being done more internal arrangement, right? Idea was to also ensure that the capital gains tax is optimized, Well, that is very important because the values involved are all significantly large. We are talking about 2.5 lakh crores of market cap for the listed companies, 1.75 lakh crores of land in some parcels, right? Plus various other unlisted company valuations and all. We are talking about a huge, huge, huge value. So capital gains tax optimization is one of the key and important requirements. The second is deal designed for smooth regulatory clearance and business continuity. So it should not affect the continuity of business. It should not affect clearances to be obtained from various regulatory authorities because some of them are even listed. So more important in those cases. So the advisors sat together and created a roadmap for balancing the various needs, the family priorities, the legal requirements, the financial importance, all that. And that's how this could actually move through and come to some conclusion. So with that, it came to a fair, tax efficient, and litigation free transition by using experts' knowledge to take this in the right direction. To put it very, very simply, you may all know that a family settlement, let's say you and two brothers are exchanging shares between themselves or exchanging some assets between themselves as a family settlement. When they are doing it as a total family settlement and it's registered as a family settlement, there may be no capital gains arising in that context. Whereas if there was a demerger and if there were transfer of shares without doing any of these, then that could be a trigger of taxation. Even stamp duty in some states for family settlements, it is capped at a small value. So there could be huge land parcels, etc., which is being settled between family members. There could be a very small stamp value, unlike in the case of exchange with a third party where it would be treated as a transfer. So these are other things which also need to be considered. So there is an enormous amount of planning and enormous amount of evaluations which needs to be done to look at the most efficient manner. And at the same time, it has to be fair to all the parties. It should also ensure that it's not going to lead to litigation in future, right? All three are required. So to ensure that happens, it is very critical for them to consider all these factors and do it. So some of the things they looked at was the assets and business division, right? So some companies like MCPL, MPL, and the Mahindra Agro were to go to the Anand Raghavan and Mahindra's family, and Mahindra Brook and the other industrial and land assets were to go to Raghav Mahindra's family. The structure aligned the business control with operational leadership, so it moved both business and this thing. The land bank allocation was with Mahindra and Brooks, which is where most of the land was earlier also there. Development and monetization rights were clearly demarcated for post-settlement. So some properties in this were held by trust, some properties were held by trust for the benefit of family members, etc. Those, when it was developed and monetized, how it will flow to the trust and through that to the larger family members, etc., was very clearly articulated in the settlement so that it is taken care in the process. The next issue is with regard to the brand and IP rights. The Mahindra brand was split and it was defined with usage norms. Who can use for what? For example, I can use it for engineering components, he can use it for reality, right? Somebody else could use it for FMCG, etc. was made very, very clear, and all that was brought into some this thing. So there is a shared brand. The brand is being used by both families, both segments of the business now, but it was done in a manner that there will be no overlap and ensures there is market clarity. If it is this, it comes from so and so, and if it is the other one, it comes from so and so. Right? So this was the other key thing which was taken care to ensure there is least amount of disruption, and it was done with a very, very simple this thing. Very structured family business demergers. So a lot of demergers, etc., were involved in the process in doing this whole transaction. Alongside all this, there is also a lot of communication which has to be there with different stakeholders, which also is very critical to ensure that the transition happens successfully. Internally, it has to focus on updates to employees, right? Because they are always wanting to know that they are not going to be affected with all this which is happening. There has to be town halls held to ensure that there will be no job losses, how the business is going to be continued growing, right? What kind of brand values are going to be continued? What is their commitment for future innovation, sustainability of the business, etc.? So that internal communication was there. Similarly, external, wherever there were investors, you had already a lot of investor hesitancy because of the complex structure. So the split became a positive sign. So how do you also then communicate it and make it into a very positive note to say that this makes it very clear on the ownership and who's going to be the promoter, who's going to be driving it, who's going to be at the leadership helm and taking decisions, right? What kind of brand usage is clearly available for this listed entity, etc., and better governance visibility. Because whatever happens in the family council and then come and get executed here is not visible to the public, right? So how that is going to be addressed becomes very clear, because now you know that one set of family is coming into this, one set of family is going out of this. So there was on the whole, with the right communication happening, etc., listed company actually saw a very positive sentiment post announcement. Media and market perception were also very important, right? It was very well appreciated for the professionalism and the unity which was meant. It was seen as a model to be emulated by other businesses which are looking at transition. So overall, it was a transition with significant amount of positive internally as well as externally, not only in terms of financial settlement, but in terms of how the business is perceived by various stakeholders. So the strategic lessons which we learn from the settlement, one is that we need to recognize generational shift. So there is something which is happening everywhere in every family-owned businesses. The second is the very, very root, this thing of succession planning. It is important that there should be a clear plan and the way it is going to be transitioned. Right? And then the third is governance structures. In all this, how the governance structures is going to be there, which ensures all this is bound together. There is a proper transition happening. Every stakeholder has trust in the whole process. How the family councils and independent boards will act, right? Business continuity, how it will be ensured, and also sustainability of the business, how it will be ensured. The crux of the whole thing is early resolution avoids friction. For example, before this became maybe another one generation or so, they had waited. By then, the gap would have been so big, then they would have started fighting, bickering at least, right? Then clear role demarcation is good for smoother transition. Who's going to do what exactly in terms of operationally, commercially, what is going to be their ownership rights, etc. All that being very clear makes it important. And very transparent communication makes it a significant positive to the whole achievement. Now I'm going to take through some scenarios and then a few MCQs. As most people are connected through other this thing, I'm going to put it across straight, right? The questions as well as the answers. So, what role does succession planning play in ensuring continuity in a legacy driven conglomerate like Mahindra? This is one of the first questions. How does strategic misalignment between family members affect corporate performance? These are the two things we are going to look at in scenario one coming from this. So, the first one is looking at the succession planning role. In a large group like this, especially where there are multiple diverse businesses, etc., and there are too many people from the family in hierarchy there, right? It is very critical to ensure that there is leadership continuity. It is also important to ensure that institutional knowledge is preserved and it is also taken forward. The institutional knowledge is essentially a very, very important resource. This is the various things it has learned over a period as an organization, how it is going to be taken forward. This could be the trust which has been built, it could be the relationships which have been built with various people, it could be the operational expertise. There are so many things. So this is called as the resource-based view, RBV, right? Where you are looking at the knowledge from the institutional knowledge to how to take it forward, right? The example in this case is Mahindra's deep-rooted expertise in real estate and consumer goods, right? By transitioning it through a structured mentorship, that's how you manage the succession planning. Now, you don't just hand over to somebody else and say, now you do whatever you want. I was doing it in my way. But transitioning that, so slowly bringing somebody into the various parts, right, in a manner that they are understanding these institutional knowledge and taking it forward so that the company thrives better. The second is from a corporate governance or stewardship theory, right? This is to align the family interest as well as the long-term sustainability. If you don't have planned succession, it can lead to disputes or power struggles within the family. So that is why it is important to have a very, very clear planned succession. If you don't have planned succession, it is not only a problem for you, it also creates uncertainty in the minds of investors. So they are going to actually discount you. Then even for employees, it is going to leave a concern. So if the employee has a better opportunity elsewhere, he would rather leave than hang on here, knowing that there could be a sudden change because there is no planned succession and you don't know what the future is going to be like. So you don't know what your future is. Similarly, even the partners, both on the buy side and sell side, they are going to be worried, right? So here, again, the way the family constitution was earlier run and clear role definitions which were there even before they split into two businesses helped avoid such conflicts and also provided way for a smooth transition when the split happened. The next is to look at the dynamic capabilities framework, right? Which is to adapt leadership transition to changing market conditions. Market conditions keep changing, right? So examples again coming from Mahindra's expansion into digital ecosystems, sustainability, and various FMCG innovations they started bringing in. The next thing is also to bring in next-gen leaders, like earlier we were seeing also. That Piyush Mahindra, once he came, he gave a real push to real estate business. So these are fresh perspectives people bring, and next generation brings a different thought process. Institutional theory is to ensure that everybody is take care in the stakeholder continuum, right? By having proper governance and by having transparent process, etc. So this is the importance of succession planning. And what can happen because of strategic misalignment? So that is the next part to look at. So if there is a strategic misalignment, it can lead to governance conflict. It can lead to loss of competitive advantages, can lead to stakeholder distrust. Markets may not like to invest in the group. There could be cultural fragmentation. Employees could start leaving. So, in the long run, actually, the company or the group may start having deteriorating effect. So, it is very, very important to have a very structured governance process for ensuring that there is a smooth transition and smooth movement of business in a large conglomerate, especially more so specifically. Like many of the groups you see, this is something you will notice that they have their own process to ensure that at a group level there is some direction and drive which is there in a single direction. Otherwise, it could become a problem. These are the various theories connected with that. Agency theory talks about conflicts between family owners and managers. That is, managers could also be some family owners in many cases, right? So this is the dispute which could happen. As a board member, I might want to do, but I might be only a 20% shareholder. There are other 20% shareholders who don't want to dive in that direction. So this is one area of conflict which can come. That's called the agency theory, right? The stewardship theory is where family members try to, give directions, right? Now, when that happens, where are they giving directions based on? Is it for the business or the companies to grow, or is that personal interest being prioritized? Sometimes this is another area which needs to be clearly understood. To give a small example, again, I'm not saying it happened here, but to give a small example, the huge land parcel which was there, the group could have just said, oh, we are not into real estate. Because if you notice, the M&B side of the business was not into real estate. They were sitting with land, that's all, right? We are not into real estate. So what we will do is, we will demerge these lands into a separate company to some shareholders, right? Some family members who are interested in it alone. And then let them go and unlock the values or whatever they want to do with it. Now, in a scenario like that, the question arises, is it because of what is the best interest for the group as a group and all the stakeholders concerned, or is it because the land has significant value and it can be moved from the main business to a separate company which is controlled by a few family members and it's for their benefit? So is it personal interest or business interest? Now, these are the kind of things which can come. We saw the RBV and the stakeholder theory, right? And the institutional theory. We already saw that. So I'll jump to the next one. So these are the things with regard to the first one we were talking about. The second is about the brand. Why is brand IP separation challenging in a family business with shared legacy? What legal and financial consideration must be addressed while dividing common assets like land? So these are the two things which are coming up in this, right? So we saw that the two key things in the group in the transitioning is, one is the huge land bank, the other is the brand, right? So that is the one we are taking up now. So in the case of brand separation challenge, let's look at it. The Mahindra brand has been used by everybody in the family for decades and decades. Now there is legacy, there are also emotional ties, and there are also a lot of legal complexities because this has been used by so many people. There is no specific this thing of how it has been given to somebody who owns the brand, etc. All that is unclear because it just happened over the period. Nobody thought of all this and had a master brand agreement and somebody owns the brand, etc. That was not ever the case in these things. So various global examples show solutions like co-branding, right? Creating trusts for holding the brand or sector-specific licensing, right? So Mahindra Group took the option of co-owning the brand, but to operate independently, right, in their own areas. It's not exactly sector-specific licensing, but it is that whatever they are currently doing, they will be allowed to do using that. TVS also did something similar, right? The TVS brand could be used by them in this thing. The Tatas did a trust model or equivalent of that. The Tata brand license fee is paid to either I'm not sure whether it is paid to Tata Sons or Tata Trust or something, Tata Sons, I think. So they created something like that. So every company needs to take license going from there. We'll look at some examples in a major family split which happened in 2005. The elder brother took the petrochemicals and the younger brother took telecom and power. They shared the brand. How did they share it? They said one will use it for energy and retail, the other will be able to use it for power and communications. So, something like that. They decided that they will share it for different purposes or different segments, sector specific differentiation for the brand. Then a large South Indian group, right, which had multiple family branches, they went in for structured shareholding agreements and sector specific branding. So there were some shareholding agreements so that some people, even the other families, had some interest in this family's business, etc. But when it came to the brand, they said it will be sector specific. So some companies will have right for certain lines. It is not only unique in India, it is everywhere. South Korea, a large South Korean conglomerate, similarly, they divided. One took it for electronics, one took it for CNT, right? So here what they did, they said the holding company will hold the brand like the Tatas did, right? And then that holding company will give out the license to everyone. And they are licensed to use that. The holding company will get something and it will pay for various people. Another French legacy group. Another very, very interesting this thing. There was dispute, lot of disputes. It was in the cosmetics business, one of the world's leading cosmetics business. There were huge disputes between the legal heirs. So the brand was moved into a trust so that the trust can give out the brand where it requires and get revenue from that. And they also ensured that independent of all the legal heirs, there was a major professionally managed large corporate who came in as a neutral stakeholder to ensure that governance is taken care in the process of this now and in the future, right? So these are various models which people have done. Fifth case is German vehicle major, right? Here again, two brands were to merge into a company. There was a lot of dispute on, losing the name, etc. in the process of merger. So the family of one were very, very this thing. So they clashed on the merger because the name will be lost. The brand will be lost. So what was finally decided is that the brands will stay independent, right? While control will be with the other company and majority control will be there, the brand will stay independent and the brand will be continued under a different name, right? Under the old name, so that the brand is protected and grown. Now, coming to the land parcel, which we were talking about. So, the various legal considerations were one is ownership structure and title clarity. Many of these lands were under family trust, joint holding companies, or subsidiaries, right? So, either they were held by family trust, they were held jointly by multiple companies or subsidiaries. So, wherever the land was jointly owned, they made a partition deed or demerger, as the case may be, right? So they did a complete title audit to confirm ownership, encumbrances, all that, and then addressed it parcel by parcel. Imagine doing this for 3,000 acres of land, multiple parcels. Then, from a trust perspective, some of these trusts were irrevocable trusts. So, whether even beneficiaries can modify the trust deed without litigation was an issue, right? So they went to legal advice on that, etc. And based on legal advice, wherever amendment was possible in the trustee, they did that. Or they created new trust for some of the devices. Now, from a communication perspective, I think we looked at this already. What are the risks of poor communication during high profile family restructurings? How can stakeholder confidence be retained during such transitions? So the risk of poor communication or reputation damage, because the group might not be perceived well and the brand trust may erode. Media speculation can lead to customers losing interest in you, investors getting skeptical about you. It can affect employee morale and talent attrition could happen. As I was mentioning, that if I am not very clear, if I have an opportunity elsewhere, I will go to a stable boat than be in a rocky boat here, especially at senior levels, which is very important for you to actually ensure you have a good growth, etc., and operational excellence. So this could be another issue which can come. Investor and market reactions. Like we discussed, it was a positive in the market, the announcement in this company's case, Mahindra Group's case. Whereas in another auto company's case, there was a 10% drop during the family split in 2008 because it was a dispute were there, a lot of gray area were there, etc. Credit rating could be downgraded if you don't have the right messaging and right confidence which is being communicated. Then there are also regulatory and legal risks like SEBI, MCA, or tax authorities starting a scrutiny, right? Minority shareholders could create issues for lack of transparency. It happened in a IT major in 2017, not during a family split, but when there were some family members who raised issues in the, in the governance, etc. So minority shareholders went in for dispute. Family relationship could break. That is another issue coming from all this. That's also very, very important. In this large Mahindra group, they were able to retain the family relationship well, which is also another critical thing. So how do you address this? You can do tailored messagings properly. I'm going to go a little fast on this because we'll otherwise not be able to have too many. This thing, I will share this anyway. I've already given this to be uploaded in this thing to be available to all of you. You can use crisis communication model, communication mechanism, which is being developed by Coombs, situational crisis communication theory. How you do the communications. So that could be another thing. Bring in transparency by bringing better governance models, like using some neutral mediator, or there could be some oversight. There could be some professional thing. There could be a family constitution which is published so that people get an idea of what exactly is being done by the family, right? How they are going to manage it. Change management could be done using the Kota's 8-step formula. I think you would have all read about it. Then brand management, which needs to be there. Sometimes you may want to create sub-brands. instead of creating the brand itself or splitting the brand, you might want to create sub-brands or a tag-along brand, things like that. Confidence building measures. One is for the investors, transparent financial reporting with no surprises, right? How a South Indian group was able to get a stable stock price post split like the TVS group. Employees, job security assurances, clear leadership. A large conglomerate dealing with the post exit of group chairman and how they went in for restructuring without losing any significant people. Customers, how do you ensure that uninterrupted service and brand consistency is there? The same auto group which I was talking about, when they had a split, they ensured that this part is addressed well. The regulators, by having a compliance first approach and pre-approvals, like what the Reliance did, it was a completely SEBI compliant demerger when that was done long back. Coming to the MCQs, what was the primary strategic driver behind the Mahindra family's decision to restructure their business holdings? Was it to resolve public legal dispute between family members? Was it to unlock growth by reducing operational overlap and aligning with generational priority? Was it to merge all businesses under a single listed entity for better valuation? Was it to exit legacy business and focus only on FMCG and real estate? If you really look at it, from whatever we were seeing earlier, it was essentially to unlock growth by reducing operational overlap and aligning with generational priorities. So there were people in the fourth generation who have come in now, right? And second, between the groups, there were operational overlap. So to all this to be addressed was the key driver. MCQ 2. Why did the Mahindra family engage external advisors during the settlement process? To mediate personal disputes between family members, to ensure compliance with SEBI tax laws and fair asset valuation, to help sell off underperforming businesses, or to manage day-to-day operations. Here also, as we can see, it is B, right, which is to ensure that it is done in a fair asset valuation and completely compliant manner because it's a large conglomerate, right? Looking at the third MCQ, what key governance challenge did the Mahindra family face before the settlement? A lack of formal family constitution leading to strategic bottlenecks? Was it resistance from shareholders in listed companies? Was it government intervention in land monetization? Was it overlapping management roles in all subsidiaries? The key was there were some overlapping management roles, but not necessarily in all subsidiaries. But the key gap was lack of formal family constitution, which led to strategic bottlenecks. How they were thinking diverged. So every time there is always an issue there. MCQ 4, how the Mahindra brand ownership was addressed. One brand retained exclusive rights. Both branches continued shared usage, but with defined norms to avoid overlap. The brand was sold to a third-party investor or a government-mandated joint custody arrangement. So I think many things, yeah, somebody has said 4B. Many answers are B here. So be it. Both branches continued shared usage. So MIG and MEG, both of them continue to use Mahindra brand, but for specified usage and within the defined norms so that they don't overlap each other and get into a trouble in future or cause friction in the future. What was the most sensitive asset requiring careful valuation? The consumer products overseas subsidiaries? Was it the 3,000-acre Hyderabad land bank? Or was it Mahindra Agro's patents? Or the philanthropic trust? Again, somebody has put already as B, and it is indeed B, 3,000 acres of land bank, because as I was explaining, it is very large. Current value is huge. Some people may want to monetize immediately. Some people might want to hold on to get better valuation, but you never know what will happen with these things, right? So it was a big, important thing. Now, with this, we are coming to the end of the first case study. It's 7:55 now. We'll take a 10-minute break. 8:05 we will reassemble for 8:05 we'll reassemble for the second case study, right? I trust that's fine, and let's take a short break. Thank you. case study. I'm just going to project the second case study. Just give me a minute. Yes. So the second case study is a slightly smaller one comparatively. And at the end of it, maybe we can have some questions you can put on the chat box, if any, in between. So we can look at that also. So the second case study is based on a case which was published in November 25 by in the magazines. Your Vitality Limited. Your Vitality Limited is the company's name in this, and that is the YVL is the company we are going to look at. Interestingly, this is also a Hyderabad-based entity. So maybe we are from the Telangana state this time. So Your Vitality Limited is a Hyderabad-based pharma company operating in a complex and regulated health ecosystem. Now, there are many regulations which apply to pharma industry and companies in that. Their core challenge was they have a short shelf life products because these are medicines of certain nature. And the demand production mismatches which were there have led to the bullwhip effect, causing significant increase in inventory, high returns, and higher regulatory and GST costs which are attached to it. The focus of this case is to look at efficient supply chain management, ethical financial reporting, including the auditor's role under the Companies Act to protect stakeholders' interest. This is the core of what is coming up in this case study, which we are going to be looking at, right? The first discussion we are going to have in this case study is to do with the directors expecting certain things. The directors were wanting to understand the various activities carried out by YVL in order to gain insights on how they can improve and create better value for customers. So what they can do, how they can understand and appreciate the business so that they can create better value for the customers. So evaluate the broad set of activities and develop Michael Porter's value chain analysis for YVL. So how do you put value chain and how do you look at it, right? So that is what we are going to see in the first part of this thing. Here, I've just taken it and straight got into the discussion on each of these subjects straight. So it becomes easier because it's already a published case study from the November book. So if you look at a company like YVL, which is into pharma manufacturing, now their primary activities are inbound logistics, very, very critical in an operation like this. Then there is operations which are happening in the factory. Then there is outbound logistics. Whatever you produce has to go somewhere, right? And there is also marketing and sales to enable this to happen. And there is also service which needs to be given to customers. So broadly, you can divide it as 5 primary activities: inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing, and service. And all of them should produce a margin for them. Now, this also requires certain support activities. We will see about each of these as we move forward. Firm infrastructure, which is there. human resources which are there and how you are dealing with it, technology development and procurement. These are support activities which are required to manage the primary activities in the most appropriate manner, right? So, what is Michael Porter's value chain analysis? It's basically a strategic model that breaks down the company's activities, right? Primary activities, like we were discussing, all the primary activities directly create value. And what are the support activities which actually enable the primary activities? But for the support activities, the primary activities cannot create value, right? So the idea of analyzing it like this is to identify the source of competitive advantage or cost issues, right? Customer value, etc. Where it is coming from, how it can be looked at. This is the whole objective of the Michael Porter's value chain analysis, as you may have looked at. So let's look at the individual components in this. Each primary activity when we start looking at. The first one is the inbound logistics. All right. Now, this is very critical to ensure that you get the right raw materials and other materials of the right quality and quantity in time to enable you to operate well. This is very, very important and critical. Then coming to operations, as YBL is into manufacturing of tablets, capsules, injections, and liquids, right? Handling, packaging, labeling, quality control, all these are very important. Also, complete regulatory compliance, because these are medicines and pharma industry have a lot of regulatory requirements. All those regulatory requirements are also critical in the operations. From an outbound logistics perspective, this might be going to domestic or international. In the case of YBL, it is for both markets. Then how do you do the distribution? How do you use your C&F agents? And what kind of storage facilities you have? What kind of quality management you have in storage? How do you manage your inventory? Because in pharma, one of the things is to also ensure that the inventories are properly dealt with, because these have, particularly some of the materials which are produced by this company has short shelf life. So how do you manage all that is very important. Then coming to marketing and brand visibility, it is critical because they are not purely a B2B player. They are doing a lot of products for the consumers. So YVWell was using a catchy slogan, the promise of vitality. The promise of vitality was its tagline to address and create an awareness as well as a brand image in the market. Coming to market coverage and sales strategy, the C&F agents were providing insights as to distribution possibilities and where there are gaps, where we can look at new stockists, etc., so that the distribution is enhanced. Now, one of the very, very important things in sales like this, if you don't have coverage, you lose the market. So obviously your sales will be lower. So you have to have coverage. That is very critical. And then brand visibility, etc., to be able to sell. So the coverage, how do you cover the market? Get insight from the CFA, where there are gaps, because he's in the market already, he knows better. That's smaller regions which are under his purview. Take inputs from him, identify areas where you can have new stockists, and then move to those new stockists for additional sales. You also conduct regular interactions with key wholesalers, look at market trends, what is the competitor activity which is happening, right? All that to ensure you are enhancing it. Then also there is a need for after sales service, right? Now, what is after sales service? This can be two, three things. One is to, create better awareness amongst doctors, better awareness amongst nutritionists, etc., who will actually be recommending these. So there is a lot of training which goes on, right? About your product, you give training to various people who might be the influencers in getting this moved, right? There is also need to ensure you give them support. You give them support. Here I'm talking about the stockists, etc., especially when there are returns, right? If there are quality issues, if there are any customer complaints, etc., because these are very critical for you to ensure that the sales cycle continues and growth happens there. So it is very, very critical component from the sales perspective to ensure that you give a good service to the market. If you don't handle returns well, then there will be hesitancy in taking stocks. So these are the things which needs to be addressed from a market orientation side. Coming to the various support activities, each support activity looking at it. First is overall structure. You have to have compliance, you have to have patents wherever you are having patented products, right? Or to ensure that you are patenting it, or you have the right formulations, etc. Then you manage your finance, operations, public relations, HR, all that to be properly structured into your organization. Then coming into other than the broad infrastructure, coming into specifically people are a very critical thing in a pharma business. So HR management is highly important to ensure you get the right talent, right? Either by fresh recruitments, training, retention, right? Performance management, etc. Now, also to ensure that sensitive roles are safeguarded, right? And sensitive information is also safeguarded through policies and code of conduct, both. Because in a pharma company, a lot of sensitive information, sensitive formulations, etc., may also be involved to ensure that these are appropriately protected and handled. The third is technology development. Here, when we say technology, it is not IT or something. It is more about R&D, because pharma products growth can come only from research and development, right? So one of the key pillars required is a strong R&D system to ensure there is innovation, to ensure there is quality and cost efficiency which are brought in an appropriate timeline to make the company a continuing running mission. So this is the other support activity which is very, very critical, technology enablement or R&D for the pharma business. Procurement is another key area because you need the right quality API, right? Without which you won't be able to get the right product out. So how do you get the right API? Right? Of the right quality. API means active pharma ingredient. So basically raw material, right? So active pharma ingredient is API, which is what goes into your medicines and all that. So how do you ensure you have the right this thing being brought? So you can have the tested suppliers. They should also be cost effective. there should be long-term suppliers because you cannot keep changing suppliers on this very often. And then having the right machinery and infrastructure for continuing to handle it appropriately, right? So these are the various things which are critical in the pharma industry. Out of the various things which are there, these are something which are very critical for success in a pharma industry to manage well. The second part of the study we are going to look at is what mismatch happened. We were talking briefly in the beginning about a mismatch which led to inventory hike, etc., etc. So what exactly happened and what contributed to that and how it can be addressed or what needs to be looked at. What is the bullwhip effect? We will see that also, right? So this company, one of the product it had was known as the Vitrich, right? Vitarich. There was a huge demand spike and it led to a supply chain challenge for the company. What exactly happened? Let's look at this mail first and then we will go into the facts more. The mail is being written by the chief operating officer and he is addressing it to various people who are all from the different departments: marketing, production and procurement, sales. All those heads are covered here, right? It is to them he is writing. Impact of demand variability on supply chain management. So I will not go into the individual details, etc. The last one, the pattern of impact of demand variability on inventory has been noticed in few other medicines as well. As managers of marketing, etc., etc., collectively responsible for this unnecessary production. Please let me know how we can collectively resolve such issues. That is the last paragraph. Now I will come to this last but one paragraph. Not just this, in anticipation of growth in future demand, our raw material team procured the compounds required to manufacture this medicine in large quantities in the month of November and December. However, once the discount scheme period got over in January, the customer demand started tapering. Therefore, the production level of these tablets also reduced with time. Therefore, the extra stock of raw materials that were procured specifically for Vitarich have remained unused. So, problem. Okay, why did this happen? So, let's go to the previous paragraph. As pharmaceutical companies, we have a product portfolio that has limited shelf life. As our company's policy that is in line with current industry best practices, our agreement in stockists allow them to return medicines which are within 3 months of expiry. Vitarich tablets have an expiry of 5 months from date of manufacture, which means only a 2-month window to sell, right? This year, almost 30% of our initial sales volume of Vitarich tablets to the stockists have been returned either past their expiry or those that are within 3 months of expiry. So this is a problem next. So like this adds on. So I will not go through the mail anymore, right? So what is it that he was trying to understand here? The COO, which is Mohan Giri in the mail, is saying there is a challenge faced by the company on the supply chain side and wanted heads of marketing, sales, production and procurement to huddle and arrive at a solution. He wanted them to discuss and come to a solution. So what is that problem and how it is? In a broader way, I have put it here rather than look at the mail in detail. The problem, very simply put, Vitarich was an over-the-counter vitamin supplement, right? It experienced an unexpected demand surge from November 24 to January 25. So when the demand surge happened in those 3 months, right? What happened was the problem. But why did it happen? Now in hindsight, we know why it happened. what appeared to be a genuine market growth. Everybody thought it was a genuine market growth, but it was not. It was actually driven by temporary retailer discount schemes. So in those 3 months, there was a significant retailer discount scheme which was being operated, which led to the spike. But because everybody thought it was market growth happening, it created a cascade of issues for the company. So how the chain reaction worked to understand the bullwhip effect? Let's understand that. Retailer discounts. The pharmacies launched promotional schemes to boost Vita Rich, right, in specific regions. So when that happened, what happened? Their sales went up. Because their sales went up, they asked for more stocks from wholesalers. Wholesalers found they were getting into stock shortage, so they placed larger orders on the company, saying, please manufacture more, because they thought it is going to be sustained demand. Nobody knew it was because of some discounts. And because the wholesalers started giving large orders, the manufacturing doubled the projected output for the year based on their assumption that the market is growing. Right? Then what happened after the whole thing has been done and the productions have been enhanced, sales returned to normal levels after January when promotions ended. So you are ending up with huge inventory, you are ending up with a lot of stocks in this thing also, you are also sitting with receivables problem, everything came. So by going in for a 2x, doubling the production, output exceeded forecasted levels during the spike period. Initial sales volume dropped and you have been sending material, so 30% returns came. So significant returns. Why were these happening? Because the product had 5 months shelf life from production, very limited window, right? And a 3 months return policy. That is, any stock which is less than 3 months to expiry can be returned anytime by the stockist. These are required in the market to be there. All right. So you have to be very careful about your production to ensure that you are not overstocking anytime. The moment you overstock, you will have expiry or near expiry returns, and near expiry returns, once it comes to you, will expire because you would have already produced more and given to everybody. It's not going to go back anywhere within that time frame. So ultimate result is going to be huge write-offs which will happen. So this is how the impact was getting enhanced. What were the root causes if you look at it? There were a forecasting limitation. Traditional methods relied on historical sales and stockist inputs, but they could not distinguish between promotional demand and organic growth or regular growth, right? The system lacked real-time market intelligence from the retail level to ensure that you are forecasting based on better inputs. So you were forecasting based on poorer inputs, which were not having comprehensive view. There were also communication gaps. Critical information about the retail discount schemes did not flow upstream up to the manufacturer and the marketing guys. So the marketing, production, and procurement teams, they operated without proper visibility into the market, or the marketing team did not communicate it. So the production and procurement team went on overboard, right? Either way, they went into a difficult time. Because of the various requirements, the raw materials were ordered in bulk, thinking that there is a huge demand surge, right? Expired medicines held by pharmacist stockists are returned upstream, ultimately up to IVL. So in the whole pharma industry itself, it's a principal requirement that expired medicines should be taken back. Very clear. So you don't know when it will come, but it will come if it is there. So in the financial year 25-26. Of course, some dates might be beyond what we are, right? Medicines were supplied to health distributors and Eagle distributors on 25th April 25. Both these distributors returned expired medicines on 25th February 26, right? 25th February 26. Then the second set of issues came with regard to supplies made to JJ Pharma and KK Pharma on 1st July. Now, JJ Pharma returned on 20th September, KK Pharma returned on 20th December. Okay, so this was the background. Now, what happens to the tax implication on all this? Now, let's look at the first two cases, the supplies which were made to health distributors and Eagle distributors, right? In both these cases, they treated it as fresh supplies and issued invoice. That is, they treated it not as a sales return, but as a fresh supply by them by raising an invoice under GST. Basically, they were looking at it from a GST perspective. It was by way of raising an invoice back on us. Now, in this, health distributor is a registered GST person, whereas Eagle distributors is a composition taxpayer under GST. So in a scenario like this, what happens? If you take health distributors case, value of medicine supplied was 2,50,000. ITC availed by YBL at the time of manufacture was 25,000. So manufacturing time relating to this medicine, pro rata, the input taken was 25,000. On return of the medicines, right, because it was a fresh invoice, you understand? It was a fresh invoice to replace, not a credit note. ITC availed by YBL was 30,000 because he invoiced it with 30,000 ITC on it. It came. And after it came, in February, it was destroyed because the material is expired by YBL. So what is to be done in this is the first case we need to look at. In the second case, Eagle distributor's case, he is a composition taxpayer, right? So on the medicine he returned and invoiced, he had paid 10,000 as GST under the composition scheme, right? But he had raised an invoice on us for the material, right? Here also no sales return, credit note, debit note, but an invoice raised, right? So these are what happened in the case of health and Eagle distributors. Then, in the case of JJ Pharma and KK Pharma, these were addressed by way of credit note, not invoicing by them, right? Not invoiced by them as a fresh issue, but for the return, YBL issued credit notes and expired medicines were destroyed. The other fact matter we need to understand is also YBL filed its annual return on 5th December 26. Right? So these were the dates. In the context of this, what then happens? So let's look at the case 1, where health distributor raised a fresh invoice and charged GST of 30,000 rupees. Right? So he is a registered person. He is not a composition taxpayer. February 26, he returned the material. Right? The stockists had considered the return as fresh supply and actually as invoiced. So what happens? YBL availed ITC of 25,000 at the time of manufacture of medicine. So that is on the inputs, etc. Right? No problem. When the medicines were returned, there was a fresh invoice from health distributors on which there was 30,000 rupees of GST. That 30,000 would have been taken as ITC. Correct? And after taking that 30,000 as ITC, because the medicines were expired, it were destroyed. So when expired medicines are destroyed, there is a need to expunge ITC. So here the question is, what is the amount I need to expunge? If my manufacturer had been destroyed, I would have expensed the 25,000. Whereas here, it is against the supply by health distributor back to us. I am going to write off the medicine. So that 30,000 rupees input I took should be expensed. Right? So this is the first case. In the second case, interestingly, it was returned by a composition taxpayer. Because it's a composition taxpayer, he will only give me a bill of supply and not a GST invoice. So I will not be able to take any ITC credit at all. Correct? So 10,000 rupees which he pays under composition scheme, YBL will get zero ITC. That is the first problem. Now, having done that, the material is being destroyed because it is also expired. On the material which is destroyed, the original 25,000 of ITC taken will have to be expunged because material is being destroyed. There has to be pro rata expunging. If you take the third item, JJ Pharma returned the expired stocks which were originally sold to it on 1st July. YBL issued credit note on 20th September 26. As the credit note was issued before the due date for the annual return, which is 30th November, or the actual filing date, right? So the 30th November deadline is there, and this money has been paid before this credit note has been issued before the 30th November deadline. YBL can adjust the tax liability, right? This is only subject to two things. JJ Pharma has not availed the ITC, and if it had availed the ITC, it has also reversed the ITC on the returned medicine, right? So this is one issue which has come. In the case of KK Pharma, the credit note was issued after the return was filed on 5th December. So as the deadline has passed and the return has also been filed, no tax credit can be taken by YBL. So that is gone. There is no tax liability adjustment which is possible because it is after the deadline which is there, right? And however, when the expired medicines are destroyed, it will have to still reverse the ITC pro rata based on manufacture. So in the fourth case, there will be a double whammy. Because the return is late and because your credit note is late, you lose that credit possibility and you still will have to expunge. So this is the GST implications which are coming from such delays. So the delays not only pose problems with management, loss of money, etc., but also issues with related compliance. How it can go into various things. Now, all this natak with the sales and excess procurement, etc. Now, the audit manager also noticed something very funny during the audit process. So it's a suspected fraud. We are going to talk about that now. So this is the audit manager writing internal mail, right, to the audit head. there's a question somewhere. Yeah. Somebody has raised when there is no need to issue credit note but treat it as a fresh supply. See, the problem is if they have sent it to you on a debit note and credit note, you will have to also respond like that. That's why when they issue a supply bill, then it becomes a different thing, or a GST invoice, it becomes a different thing. But when they return it through a debit note, credit note, you are also hit by that same requirement. So that is why it needs to be properly planned. In fact, that's exactly why the different options are looked at in the four scenarios, etc. in the previous case. Okay, coming back to this thing. Now, what this audit manager was pointing out to the audit partner is, as per the accounting policies followed by YVL, revenue from sale of medicines is recognized when control of the goods or service is transferred to the stockist at an amount that reflects the consideration it expects to receive. Revenue from sale of medicine is recognized net of accrual for sales return, discounts, etc. So when there are some returns expected, you make an adjustment on an estimate basis. The estimates for sales returns are complex and require significant judgment, etc., etc. While carrying out the audit procedures for determining accuracy of reported revenue figures, we noticed certain suspicious entries. Towards the end of the year, the company reported a spike in sales of medicine with 8 specific stockists. The goods were dispatched, the sales were recorded as revenue in YVL's books. Such sales amounted 50 lakhs. Since payment is due after 3 months, the corresponding receivable was also recorded. Right? This has happened in the last week of March because it says close to year end. However, within the first 2 weeks of April 26, the entire sales of 50 lakhs were returned to the company. We detected this while performing the aging analysis of accounts receivable on 31st March 26. Further, these returns were not considered in the calculations while creating the sales return provision for 25-26. So we saw the bullwhip effect, etc., etc. So what does this thing do? Companies, there is a push towards doing something to increase the sales so that you don't show so much of stock lying with you. So that's what they probably led to this, and there is this which has been noticed, right? So obviously, if it was a known issue which they were doing, they are not going to consider it in the sales return calculation because then the whole purpose is defeated, right? So we were unable to get satisfactory answers for the reasons for these sales returns from the management. We suspect this to be a case of channel stuffing. Now, what is channel stuffing? Channel stuffing is a nice word. What is a channel? A channel is your selling process. You sell to the C&F agent, C&F agent sells to the stockist, or you sell through the C&F agents to the stockist, stockist sells it to the retailer, retailer sells it to the customer. Now, this is called as a channel. Sales channel, right? Now, this is one channel. The second channel could be you sell it to a modern trade, so they put it in all their shelves, customers take it from there. That could be another channel. You could export to some importers in other countries. That could be a third channel. So that is why it's called channel. And what do you mean by stuffing? Is stuff, push, pack. So what is channel stuffing? It's exactly pushing more into the pipeline, knowing fully well it is not going to go to the customer, end customer. Actually, revenue is truly recognized only if the material is going to go and reach the ultimate customer. Otherwise, it will become a sales return, right? So this is known as channel stuffing. In fact, the Adidas case, which SIFIO was investigating into and all, is essentially one major thing was channel stuffing. They had booked sales and sales and sales, knowing fully well it's not going anywhere. So So here the audit manager is saying suspecting channel stuffing, where sales are artificially inflated towards the year end, even though the company knows that the stockist cannot sell so much inventory in the near term. Right? So this is the mail which has been raised. Okay. And then take it forward, etc., etc. So what exactly is the concern here? Revenue policy is there. You have a year-end sales which is immediately reversed in April. Provision which was made for sales reverse return has not considered these, right? Though it is clearly there as a return in April and the amounts are substantially large. So the audit concern is it's a possible channel stuffing, right? It has impact on your turnover, it has impact on your profits, etc. Correct? So this is the background of what happened and how the audit has identified it as a possible channel stuffing. Now let's look at the MCQs coming from these, and then we can take some general questions, if any, from any of you, right, connected with these cases or in general about similar cases. The impact of demand variability of or for Vita-rich tablets on inventory held across the supply chain can be best described as net effect, bullwhip effect, chain effect, or reverse effect. We all have discussed enough and more on this. So it is the bullwhip effect, right? So what is a bullwhip effect? I was also explaining that. So this is the simple way in which it can be explained, right? So as you flick the whip, you see how the whip elongates. As the length elongates, the scale of its volatility or the measure of its this thing significantly increases. So the customers are asking for some additional material, in our case, Vita-rich tablets, because of which the retailers find they don't have enough, they overorder. Then manufacturers buy more and more, they overorder further. And by the time it flips back, actual orders are much lower, actual sales are much lower, actual orders are much lower, then manufacturers find their sales are much lower, and their suppliers have also given them raw materials already. So much of pile-up happens in the system because of this. That's why it's called bullwhip effect, right? The second is, which of the following can be possible solutions that different heads of department offer to Mohangiri, COO, right? Expand the coverage of stockists and CFA from whom inputs are taken during the preparation of annual sales forecast, right? So one is get more information from stockists or more stockists and CFAs from whom you take information. Improve YIVL's capability of responding to changing customer demand by building agility into its operations that can quickly scale up or down to meet customer demands. Internally, improve your capability to quickly scale up or down the operations. Educate various parties involved in the supply chain like pharmacists, stockists, and CFAs about the impact of demand variations on supply chain management. So they are also better aware. So they give you the right orders and the right outlook. Encourage stockists to place bulk orders at their discretion in order so that it's not possible to forecast the sales better. So the options available are A, 1 and 4. right? And B, 2 and 3. C is 1, 3 and 3. Sorry, 1, 2 and 3. And D is all of the above, right? So these are the various options possible. And somebody has said 2B, right? For this B, that is 2 and 3. So 2 and 3 are in a way right, no doubt. But let's look at the right answer. It is 1, 2 and 3. By expanding the coverage of more stockists and CFAs from whom you take input, you get better information. So instead of asking 5 or 10, you're going to have 15 or 20 people. It gives you better impact of predictability into your model, right? So this is 1. Of course, 2 is also right. Improving the ability to respond quickly to customer demand by improving the agility. And 3, the discount scheme would have come up, right, if we had better educated them. The 4th is not applicable because bulk order at their discretion from stockists is not going to help you, right? Because it will only lead to expiry and returns. MCQ 3, when checking the internal records for medicines that were returned on account of expiry, it was noticed that many of the medicines were slow-moving items. On further inquiry with the stockists, it was found that one of the contributors was the lack of product awareness among the public. To address this, Reshma Pathak, the head of sales and marketing, decided to start a marketing and advertising campaign that will be conducted over different media, television, social media, and print media. The total cost of this campaign will be 10 lakhs. Nirav Jain, the chief financial officer at YBL, authorizes the spend on the basis that it would create 50 lakhs of additional profit over the next 2 years. So there is a economic return over at least 2 years because of this, right? Because of this spend which is going to be done. The campaign began in January 26 and the advertisements will be telecast for the next 2 years. What should be the value of intangible asset that the YBL should recognize in its balance sheet, right? So is it 5 lakhs? Is it 833, 333 pro rata, or the whole 10 lakhs to be taken to the next year, or nil? So all these are complex things which we'll have to consider. Yes, D nil, somebody has already replied. Yes, D nil is appropriate. Why D nil? We will look at that. Under India's 138 intangible assets, this 10 lakhs cannot be treated as an intangible. So it has to be expensed in FY immediately. So these are period costs, right? This is because it is not possible to identify future economic benefits that are attributable only to this campaign. That future benefits could be from multiple things. It need not be only from this campaign, right? There is no measure which meets the definition of asset coming from this. You should have control over the asset for getting benefit over it. So that will not be there in this. So it will not come as an intangible. Then coming into the 4th question, we saw that mail from the audit manager, right, to the auditor. Given the unsatisfactory explanations from the management for the year-end sales and their subsequent sales returns in April, Karthik, who is the auditor for the company, has reason to believe that an offense of fraud of 50 lakhs was the amount of the sales which were reversed, has been committed by employees or officers against the company. Which of the following are the actions taken by each party in such circumstances? Right? The first one is CA Karthik should report to the board or audit committee immediately, not later than 2 days of his knowledge of fraud, seeking their reply or observations. 2. CA Karthik should forward his report along with the reply or observations of the board or audit committee to the central government within 15 days of such reply. YBL is bound to disclose certain specified details in the board report, such as the nature of fraud, approximate amount involved, etc. Then fourth is CA Karthik should report the nature and amount of the fraud in the company's auditor's report order 2020, right? And the options available are A, 1 and 4, B is 2 and 3, C is 1, 2 and 3, D is 1, 3 and 4. So, which option is the appropriate one, which addresses all actions which are required to be taken? 4 also, the answer someone has put already as D. And let's look at it. It is D. The reason is, if you look at the individual cases, D says 1, 3 and 4. 1, yes, he should write to the audit committee within 2 days of coming to know, asking their explanation, board or audit committee as the case may be. And then 3, right, is that the board has to report, because it will 4, Karthik will report in the CARO, and because Karthik is reporting in the CARO, board has to also give a reply and background to it in its report. But 2 is not applicable because the value involved is less than 1 crore. Reporting to central government comes only when it is over 1 crore. So that is why 2 is not there. 1, 3 and 4 are applicable and are to be done is the right answer. Case. Because of this action which has happened, right, of channel stuffing and all that, assuming Reshma Pathak and Nirav Jain, who are considered as getting involved, right, can they be dismissed, right? That is what is this question revolving around. The first is both Reshma Pathak and Nirav Jain can be dismissed by YBL since they are likely to be implicated because there are evidences of fraudulent actions by both of them. There is no need to take approval of the tribunal for acting against them. Therefore, the termination of their services on November 30th is valid. So we can go ahead and terminate them. Both Reshma Pathak and Nirav Jain can be dismissed only after obtaining approval of the tribunal on an application made by YBL. If approval is not received within 30 days of application, the company cannot terminate their services. Therefore, their termination of services on November 30th is invalid. Third is, if YBL does not receive approval of termination of employment within 30 days of making an application with the tribunal, it can be considered as deemed approval by the tribunal. So can we consider it as deemed approval? Therefore, the termination of services is valid, right? This is the third option. Both Reshma Pathak and Nirav Jain cannot be dismissed by YBL until the investigation is concluded and the final report is made available to the concerned parties. Therefore, the termination on November 30th is invalid. So 4 options are there. Which one is appropriate and right in the current context? This is what we are going to see, right? The correct answer is 3, because under Companies Act Section 218, once some investigation is commenced under various sections under this thing, it gives employees certain protection during the investigation. So during the investigation, YBL cannot, once the investigation has been kicked in under the Companies Act, YBL cannot directly dismiss them without obtaining permission of the tribunal. Now, okay, without obtaining permission of the tribunal. Now, that covers both 2 and 3 in these options. In 2, it says you must receive an approval. Till then, you cannot. In 3, it says if you don't receive an approval within 30 days, it can be considered as deemed approval. Now, the Act provides that if you don't get any reply within 30 days from the tribunal, it can be considered as deemed approval, right? So if you have filed with the tribunal for permission and you have not received with answer within 30 days, or you have received a positive answer within 30 days, you can go ahead and terminate them under section 218. So this is the right answer. Now with this, I've come to the end of my presentation. The second case study was consciously kept smaller than the first one so that we'll have some time for any questions. Anyone having any questions can ask to unmute, and I can then unmute you, or you can put your questions on chat box. We can take it from there. Is tribunal approval always required in case of demerger? Now, generally, demergers are required to be approved by the tribunal because you put in through a scheme. But there are certain schemes which can go through the RD's office. So, in such cases, it can be approved by the RD's office. But when it comes to demerger, there is no such exception which is done through RD's office, right? Very, very small probability of going through ROC is there, where it's a scheme of arrangement under 230, which does not involve a compromise or arrangement with any creditors or shareholders that varies their rights. So very small window is there, but such things are exceptional. Whereas certain mergers, like for example, between holding and subsidiary and things like that, can go through the RD's office without going through the tribunal. It's a little faster route, and they have expanded that recently. Next question, anybody? Good, then I think if there are no further questions, maybe we can close the session for the day. Thank you all. Thank you very much for the patient listening, and wish you all the best with your exams. Have a great time. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, no, no. Today